positively or negatively. When Paul says, I'm strong, what does he mean? In a positive way or a negative way? What does it mean to be weak? Positively or negatively? And how is it that one can be strong when he's weak, or vice versa, weak when he's strong? And so, kind of chew on those a little bit while we look at this text. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning in verse 7. Lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Okay, let's think about these questions again. What does Paul mean when he says he boasts in his infirmities or glories in his infirmities? What does it mean to be strong in a positive way or in a negative way? What does it mean to be weak in a positive way or a negative way? And then how can one be strong when he's weak and weak when he's strong? So let's think about those. First of all, verse 7, lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations. Now, the abundance of the revelations he describes here in verses 1 to 6, and that is that he was, as I understand it, he was given a glimpse of the afterlife, an experience of what it is that happens to a person when they die. But he couldn't talk about it. He just says it's indescribable. And so he's had these revelations, so there's a chance, there is a danger that Paul might be puffed up with pride. And so in order to prevent that, God permitted Satan, or a messenger from Satan, a demon I suppose, to afflict Paul in some way. And he describes it as a thorn, and it's a thorn in the flesh. So it was a physical pain, something that caused him suffering physically. And it's described as a thorn that buffets. The messenger of Satan buffets. The word translated buffet means to beat with the fists. Literally to beat a person with fists, until they start to turn black and blue. The thorn here is not just a little thorn, but it's a word that means a sharpened stick. And so you have this messenger from Satan that is constantly jabbing, metaphorically here, jabbing Paul with his sharpened stick and beating him black and blue. So it's a real suffering. It's something that caused Paul a great deal of distress. In Matthew chapter 26, Christ in Gethsemane prayed 3 times, I don't think it's insignificant that Paul besought the Lord 3 times that this would be taken away because it caused him such distress. I think it's unprofitable to try to speculate about what the thorn in the flesh was. I will say this. One of the words that when Paul writes to the Galatians, he says that he talks about how they accepted him and didn't reject him. And one of the words that he uses is, you didn't spit at me. When I came, you didn't spit at me. Well, they would often spit at epileptics because they thought that epileptics were demon-possessed. And so they thought if you would spit toward this person who's an epileptic, it would keep the demon from attacking you. And so whatever this affliction is that Paul, whatever the thorn in the flesh was, it's something that I think other people noticed. And so whatever it was, it caused Paul a great deal of distress. It perhaps was something that other people noticed. If they didn't notice the affliction itself, they noticed the distress that Paul was in because of it. And this is given to Paul for a reason, lest he should be exalted above measure. You know, a lot of people today talk about, oh, I sure wish we could have visions, today like they had back then. Well, do you want the thorn in the flesh that goes along with it? Probably not. We don't know that always was the case, but, there's a danger there that a person be puffed up with pride. And so he had this thorn in the flesh. He pleaded with God 3 times, and he says here in verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you. Now, what does he say here when he says, my grace is sufficient for you? Well, what do we have by God's grace? Well, everything. Every good thing that we have by God's grace. And so, focus, I think there's a message here to try to focus on the good things and not necessarily the bad things, but also to understand the purpose of the infirmities. My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Whose weakness? Man's weakness. And so Paul says, therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And so, when Paul says here, I boast in my infirmities, how is he able to do that? Or to glory in his infirmities? How is he able to do that? And what is the lesson there for us?
Other passages talk about being content in what stage you are. That doesn't mean you can't improve or make improvement. And I think in a long way he's giving credit to God.
He's doing exactly that. He's saying that it's God and not me. And whatever happens to me, whatever happens to me, or whatever God does for me, it's to the praise and the glory of God and not to me. Whether that be anything, suffering, or something good.
Another passage later on suggests, if you think you're hot stuff, you better be careful.
Yeah,
And he doesn't take that approach. He says, here I am, I'm the least of the low. The bottom of the list when it really is one of God's greatest ever servants.
exactly. And it's a little bit surprising to me that he gets this thorn in the flesh, and I think it just goes to show how powerful that vision was that he had, the revelations he had, because Paul was humble. He was humble just because of his life before and the guilt that he felt for the persecution of the church. And he was humble before, and he didn't boast. But because of these revelations, so it must have been a very powerful thing for Paul to have these revelations that you take a humble man who's humble already, but yet, here's something that might cause him to be a little puffed up. So let's talk about what it means to be strong in the negative way. Paul says, when I'm weak, verse 10, for when I am weak, then I am strong. So the converse of that would be what? When I'm strong, then I'm weak. Strong in what way? This would be a negative way. Well, what does he say here? Let's go back to verse 20, chapter 11 and verse 22. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. He's talking about the false teachers here. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I'm more. Go to Philippians chapter 3. Beginning in verse 4, though I also might have confidence in the flesh. If anyone else thinks he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so. Circumcised the 8th day, the stock of Israel, tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, concerning the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. So if Paul were going to say the converse of this, he says, when I am weak, then I'm strong. Which means when I'm strong, then I'm weak. When I'm strong according to the flesh. So he's talking about Philippians 3, boast according to the flesh. So when I'm strong according to the flesh or worldly standards, then that means what? I'm weak spiritually, or there at least is a danger of being weak spiritually. Now, what would we brag about today that would be along the same lines that Paul, what might a preacher or anyone brag about today as far as if they wanted to show others how spiritually strong they were?
I've heard some preachers, maybe in their resume or their general talking or whatever, speak about the fact that they have baptized X number of people in their career. Is that important?
Right.
Maybe you've read that on some.
Yeah, how many people they baptized? A lot of people boast about their degrees, higher education. Anything that would attract attention of people, I suppose, and make a person, look good, then that's something we call that's strong according to the flesh. But
Isn't it possible to, isn't it possible to say things that you've done without bragging?
A lot of, sometimes we say, James says, say Lord willing, about this. Well, I've heard people say this or the other by the grace of God, with God's help, this, that, or the other. And that directs the attention and the glory to where it ought to be, I know a lot of preachers, they may be using an illustration in a sermon, and it's something that they personally have done or they personally have experienced. But particularly if it's something that will cast them in a good light, they'll talk about it in the third person. They'll say, I heard of a person who did such and such and such. Well, it was him. But that's something that would make him look good, so he talked about it in the third person. As it was a good illustration. He didn't want to pass it up. So Paul even said this. There were things that he could brag about, and they're not bad things. Now, what he's talking about in Philippians, but as far as his treatment of the Corinthians was concerned, everything he did for them was good. But they just turned it right around and attached something negative to it. That's why there's so much sarcasm in these two chapters. It really gets pretty bitter here in verses 13 through the end of the chapter. He has several places there where it's really bitter sarcasm, because he's kind of in that situation where you can't do anything right. I mean, nothing he says, nothing he does is right. These false teachers are going to turn it right back around on him. So, to be strong according to the flesh is to be weak in the spirit. But to be weak in the flesh is to be strong in the spirit. It's a matter of dependency upon what or whom do I depend? Do I depend upon my pedigree, my education, my accomplishments, my appearance, my stature? Do I depend upon that to accomplish things? Or do I depend upon God, and God accomplishes things in spite of this ugly, beat-up earthen vessel? Well, if you focus on God and be strong spiritually, in spite of the maladies, in spite of physical or whatever shortcomings, Paul says, then I'm strong. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to turn my focus away from this messenger of Satan that's beating me and poking me with the sharp stick, and I'm going to turn my attention away from you, brethren, who are just abusing me and abusing Titus and abusing Timothy. And I'm going to focus on God, because when I do that, that's when I'm strong. And that's when God accomplishes great things. Most gladly, there, verse 9, I'll boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And what does it mean to boast in my infirmities? Well, that can be a bad thing, or that can be a good thing. The way Paul's doing it is a good thing. But then, it can also be a bad thing. You get a couple of kids here on the playground. One's got a black eye, and another one comes the next day. He wanted to outdo him, so he got in a fight. He got 2 black eyes. So everyone's just trying to outdo each other, trying to generate sympathy, or in that case with them, trying to look tough or whatever, boasting their infirmities. What does Paul mean when he's boasting in his infirmities? Well, it's not boasting in himself, is it? But rather it's pointing to what God does. What God does with someone like Paul. And so when he boasts in his infirmities, what he's doing is he's saying, look at how powerful that God is, that he can do all these great things in spite of the one that he's using. And so as I understand, this is what it means to boast in his infirmities. Comments, questions, observation on verses 7 to 10.
Remember, there's other examples. The phrase comes up, not even worthy to do the shoelaces, putting him in perspective of who's important and where he is in the situation. And feelings don't necessarily help you go one way or the other. You probably remember when you're in school running track cross country, you go out to the meet, I feel great today. Everybody's brother passes you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So feelings don't necessarily dictate. I mean, it's okay to check with them. They don't necessarily dictate what needs to be done.
I forget where it was. I think it was my junior year. It was 40 degrees and raining. And I had my best race ever that year. And it was miserable. Well, that kind of changed my perspective. Anytime there was bad weather, I thought, it might be gnarly outside, but I'll probably have a good race. Probably because I want to get back in the bus where it's warm, But anyway, yeah, you just, focus on, a lot of it has to do with where we put our focus. Yeah. All right, verses 11 to 13. He says, I've become a fool in boasting. You've compelled me. Now, this goes, we go back here to chapter 11, verse 1. He says, oh, that you would bear with me in a little folly. Now, the folly that he's talking about here is him having to talk about himself. He doesn't want to do it. But they have compelled him because they have believed all these accusations that the false teachers are bringing. And so he has to talk about himself to them, and he says, this is foolishness that I have to do this. He says in verse 23 of chapter 11, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. When he says, my qualifications far exceed the qualifications of these people that you're believing and holding up as being smarter than everybody else in the room. But I feel like a fool because I have to tell you this. And so it just goes on like that. So he comes back to that then in verse 11 of chapter 12. I've become a fool in boasting. You have compelled me. I didn't want to say these things. I ought to have been commended by you. For in nothing was I behind, the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing. He says, you ought, when these false teachers came in and started raising his accusations against me, you should have defended me. You should have commended me and said, no, these things aren't true. Talks earlier in the book about these letters, these epistles of recommendation. These false teachers brought in these sheets of paper, had all these recommendations on them. Paul said, you're our recommendations. Your epistles written on our hearts, and we're written on your hearts. When these false teachers came in, you should have stood up to them. He says, now I have to do it. He's reminding them. There's nothing that was lacking in me of even the most eminent apostles. He probably would mean here Peter, James, John. Paul had all of the signs, all of the power, all of the authority that even the most eminent apostles had. Even though he's nothing, describes himself as being one born out of time. Verse 12, the signs of an apostle were accomplished among you with all perseverance and signs, wonders, and mighty deeds. And so Paul gave them no reason to doubt. The purpose of the signs, the wonders, and the mighty deeds was to confirm the word, to show that the words that Paul was speaking, those words were authoritative. And so it's not like he was doing some kind of sleight of hand. These were legitimate miracles that could not be contested. Verse 13, for what is it in which you were inferior to other churches? Then he goes to sarcasm. We'll get to that in a moment. What is it in which you were inferior to other churches? He's talking here about the spiritual gifts. They lacked, Paul bestowed upon them spiritual gifts so that they could be spiritually strong. And they had more, or at least as many as any other church in the New Testament. But yet they were still doubting Paul. What is it in which you were inferior, except, here he goes to the sarcasm, that I myself was not burdensome to you. Forgive me this wrong. This goes back to the fact, go back to chapter 11 and verse 7. Did I commit sin in humbling myself that you might be exalted, because I preached the gospel of God to you free of charge? They did not support Paul at all financially. Other churches supported him. And so they complained about that. Now, what if he had asked them for financial support? What would they have said then? Oh, he's only doing it for money. What are you going to do? He can't do anything to please them. And so that's why this bitter sarcasm. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't rob you financially. I'm sorry that somehow you're inferior because, I didn't ask you to support me financially. He says, now for the third time I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you, for I do not seek yours, but you. He says, I'm not going to ask for anything this time when I come, because I don't seek that which is yours. I'm not after your money. I'm not after your possessions. I'm not after anything that you have. What's he after? I'm after you. I'm after you. That's what I want. You know, that has to, if you're on the receiving end, how can that not touch your heart? It has to. He looks at them as children, and he's a parent. He says, the children don't lay up for the parents. Well, the parents lay up for the children. You know, I do a college fund, you know. Well, the parents don't, the children don't do that for the parents. I'm sure there are extreme situations where illness or death or something like this, but as a general rule, it's the parents that lay up for the children. Paul's saying that's the way it is with me. I don't want anything that you have. I want you to be right with the Lord. Verse 15. How many of us could have this heart? This has got to be hard. This is just hard. Paul says, I will very gladly. Now, he's used sarcasm here. But the purpose of the sarcasm is not to hurt their feelings. It's to get their attention. To show them how serious this is. He says, I will very gladly spend and be spent for you. Though the more abundantly I love you, the less I am loved. Now, when Paul says, when I'm weak, then I am strong, you might as well just take your pen and underline 2 or 3 times strong with exclamation points. Strong. Because what kind of a heart can say that about 2 people who have abused him in his presence and in his absence? And he still says, I will spend everything I have, and I will be spent. I will be used up for you, even though I don't get anything out of it from you. Matter of fact, the more I love you, it seems the less you love me. Well, that's strength, beloved. That is spiritual strength. How many of us could do that? Be that as it may, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you by cunning. Here's more sarcasm coming right back at him. I did not burden you. So these false teachers came in and they said, Paul's just after your money. And they say, oh, no. He didn't want any money at all. They say, oh, yeah, he's not taking it on the front end, but you just watch. He's going to be crafty and he's going to come around and that's what these false teachers have said, and guess what they did? Oh, they swallowed that hook, line, and sinker. Oh, yeah. He's trying to get the money some other way. Being crafty, I caught you by cunning. Did I take advantage of you by any of those whom I sent to you? Titus, Timothy? Did they try to take it? No. We all acted the same. Then in verse 19, he says, we're not defending ourselves to you. That's like a byproduct. That's an incidental. We're defending ourselves before God because God knows. God knows our hearts. That's the important thing. He talks here about his coming to visit them again. And he says, I fear that when I come, I'm not going to find you such as I wish. I want to come, I want to find you penitent. You need to be penitent of these sins. And that I shall not be found by you, and that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish. In other words, it's going to be like, Daddy's home, you're going to get it now. That kind of thing. Paul said he has spiritual power, he has spiritual authority, and he was going to exercise that in a disciplinary way. And it's a way that they weren't going to like. Lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, tumults. Look down at verse 21. Uncleanness, fornication, lewdness. Lots of sins in the church there. They have not repented of them. I think a lot of them are connected to these false teachers, particularly the uncleanness, fornication, and lewdness. And when he concludes this book, when he says in chapter 13 and verse 12, greet one another with a holy kiss, I wonder if that doesn't have anything to do with chapter 12 and verse 21. Because you have people there that are practicing uncleanness, fornication, and lewdness. In other words, oh, I'm just showing Christian affection, when it's more than affection. Congregation once, there's a gentleman in this congregation that he would go around, he wanted to go around and hug the young women after church. And he had some handicaps, but it was not mental. And the fellow sat around, he watched soap operas all day. It was filthy, soft porn, basically. And so when he got to church, he wanted to go around and hug some of the young ladies, and some of those hugs were very inappropriate. Well, they had a tradition there of greeting one another with maybe an embrace or a kiss on a kiss, which is usually be on the cheek. He says that needs to be done in a holy way, and not something that would lead to uncleanness or lewdness or fornication. They've got a lot going on in that congregation that's just terrible. A lot of it brought on by the false teachers, and a lot of it just because of the city in which they live. I mean, this is the Las Vegas times, times 10 of the ancient world. And so they have that, they have the false teachers, but they have everything they need to do right. They have the spiritual gifts. They have everything they need in that congregation to stay faithful, just not using it. Questions, comments, observations, anything in chapter 12? We're about out of time. We only have about 2 or 3 minutes left, so I'm not going to get into chapter 13 right now. That will wrap up 2 Corinthians, so anything at all? Yes.
Talks about paradise. That's where Christ went, right? The 3 days or 2 days before he went to heaven.
Well, he says to the thief on the cross, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. So it's the dwelling place of saved disembodied spirit.
Well, that's where we all go when we die. Either that or where the rich man and
Yes. It's, no, it's, well, yes, it's torment. It's the Hadean world. The Hadean world is the dwelling place of disembodied spirits. And within that Hadean world, there are two places, paradise and torment.
So when we die, if you go to torment, you already know you're not going to heaven.
Right,
I mean, as far as the judgment goes, it's over. It's not over, but you know.
right, exactly. As I understand it, when he said paradise, this is where Paul went in this vision.
He didn't actually go to heaven itself. He went to paradise.
Right. That's as I understand it. Yeah. Okay, well, it's a quarter after, so I'm going to turn you loose. Thanks for being here this morning.